To set up the game of Sushi Go, first, set up the game. To do this, first choose one player to be the dealer. The dealer will shuffle the deck of cards and deal cards to each of the players in the game. In a 2-player game, deal 10 cards to each player. In a 3-player game, deal 9 cards to each player. In a 4-player game, deal 8 cards to each player. In a 5-player game, deal 7 cards to each player. Each player may look at their hand of cards, but they should keep them hidden from all other players in the game. The remaining deck cards will be placed face down in the middle of the playing area. Finally, players should get a piece of paper and a writing utensil to keep score. After setting up the game, players are ready to begin playing. The game of Sushi Go is a light game that plays out over 3 rounds. Each round is basically a mini-game where players will be dealt a new hand of cards. To start each round of the game, each player will look at their hand of cards. Each player will choose one card that they would like to play from their hand and place it face down in front of them. After each player has placed a card in front of them, they will set their hand of cards aside, and all players will simultaneously flip over the one card they placed in front of themselves. After revealing their one card, each player will pass their remaining hand cards to the player to their left. So each player will receive a new hand of cards. Each player will look at the new hand of cards and choose one card to place in front of themselves, just like they did during the first turn. Then all players will, once again, simultaneously flip over their one card and then pass their hand of cards to the player to their left. They will continue this process of choosing one card from their hand to play and then passing their hand cards to the left, until all of the cards have been played in front of players. There is a special card in the game that must be noted, the Wasabi card. Any player who has played a Wasabi card in their player area must be aware that the next Nigiri card they play in their player area must be placed on top of their Wasabi card. This will triple the value of that Nigiri card. Points will be explained further later. It should be noted that a Wasabi card only works on Nigiri cards played after the Wasabi is played. So this player could not put their Wasabi card on top of their Squid Nigiri card they had played on the previous turn. The Wasabi card only gives a higher value to the next Nigiri card played. There is another special card in the game that players may use the effect of while playing their cards. This card is a Chopsticks card. If you play a Chopsticks card from your hand, it will give you the ability to play 2 cards from your hand on your future turn. Here's how the card works. Let's say this player played a Chopsticks card from their hand during their turn. They would not do anything with the card on the turn that they flipped it over. It would simply sit in their player area. However, on a future turn, the player may have a hand of cards from which they would like to play more than one card. This is where the Chopsticks card can come in handy. To use their Chopsticks card, the player will simply play one of their cards from their hand as usual. Then, before players flip over their cards to reveal what they played, you would call out Sushi Go. Pick up the Chopsticks card from your player area and add it back into your hand of cards. The Chopsticks card will now be able to be used by another player in the game. Finally, play a second card from your hand. You will then simply flip over 2 cards when all other players are flipping over the card that they selected to play. It should be noted that players are allowed to have more than one Chopsticks card in their player area at one time, but they may only use one Chopsticks card per turn of the game. A round of Sushi Go ends when all of the hand cards have been placed face up in front of players. At the end of the round, all players will complete their scoring. Each card they played has the potential to score them points, if they were able to collect the right amount of a type of card. Let's look at each of the cards in the game and what they can score each player. The most prevalent card in the game is the Maki roll. There are 3 different types of Maki rolls: the single, the double, and the triple. The player with the most total Maki roll icons at the top of their cards will score 6 points. If multiple players have the same amount of Maki roll icons on their cards, they will split the 6 points, rounded down. So if both of these players tied for the most with 7 Maki roll icons on their cards, they would split the 6 points, and each of them would score 3 of the possible 6 points. If there is a tie for the most Maki rolls, the tied players will be the only players to score points. If there is not a tie for the most Maki rolls, and one player scored the 6 points, a score will also be given to the player with the second most Maki roll icons played in front of them. The player with the second most icons will score 3 points. If there is a tie for the second most icons, the players will split the 3 points between the tied players, rounded down. So if these two players tied for second most icons, they would split the 3 points between them, rounded down, and each of the tied players would score 1 point. It should be noted that players must have at least one Maki roll card played in their area to be considered in the scoring for Maki rolls. You cannot win second place by playing 0 cards. Another card a player may have in their player area is the Tempura card. Tempura cards only have a value if they are played in sets of 2. A set of 2 cards played in your player area is worth 5 points. You may score more than one pair of Tempura cards, but you can only score for a pair. So this player would score 15 points for 3 pairs of Tempura cards. This player would only score 5 points because they only have one full pair of Tempura cards. To score any points for a Sashimi card, you must have 3 matching cards. So a player with 1 or 2 Sashimi cards will unfortunately score 0 points. You will score 10 points for each set of 3 Sashimi cards you have in your player area. However, it is very rare to have more than one set. Dumpling cards will always score a player points. The more dumplings you have played, the more points you will score. A single dumpling card in your player area will score you 1 point. 2 dumpling cards will score you 3 points. 3 cards will score you 6 points. 4 cards will score you 10 points. And 5 or more dumpling cards will score you 15 points. There are 3 different types of Nigiri cards in the game: egg, salmon, and squid. Any of these cards that you have played in your player area will score you the amount of points indicated on the bottom of the card. So each egg Nigiri card you have will score you 1 point. Each salmon Nigiri card you have will score you 2 points. And each squid Nigiri card will score you 3 points. As mentioned earlier, the Wasabi card is a special card in the game. The card only has value to a player if it is played with a Nigiri card. Any single Wasabi card without a Nigiri card on top of it will score a player 0 points. Any Wasabi card a player has in their player area that has a Nigiri card played on top of it will score that player triple the points indicated on the bottom of the card. So this egg Nigiri played on top of Wasabi would be worth 3 points. This salmon Nigiri on top of the Wasabi would be worth 6 points. And this squid Nigiri card on top of Wasabi would be worth 9 points. Any Chopsticks cards a player has in their player area at the end of the round will not score them any points. The final type of card a player may have in their player area at the end of the round is the pudding card. Pudding cards have the potential to score players points, but as indicated on the card, they will not score anything until the end of the game. If you forget the amount of points you score, you can look at the bottom of the card for a hint. All players will tally up the total points they scored for the cards in their player area and write down their score for the round. For example, this player would score 5 points for the pair of tempura, 0 points for their single tempura, 6 points for the salmon nigiri dipped in wasabi, 6 points for these 3 dumplings, and 1 point for this egg nigiri, for a total of 18 points for the round. After each player has scored their points for the round is over, and players will start a new round. To start a new round of Sushi Go, first, players will clean up the previous round. To do this, all players will place the cards they played in front of them during the previous round in a discard pile next to the draw pile in the middle of the playing area. The only cards that players will not discard are any pudding cards they played during the round. All pudding cards will remain face up in the player's area. Any pudding cards they play in subsequent rounds will be added to their pudding cards played in previous rounds. Next, each player will get a new hand of cards. They will get the same amount of cards they were dealt in the previous round. After each player's area has been cleared of all cards, except their pudding cards, and each player has been dealt a new hand of cards, a new round will begin. The round will be played in the same way that the previous round was played, with each player playing one card from their hand and then passing their hand of cards to the left. You may also alternate the direction you pass your hand cards. So during round 1, you could pass to the left. During round 2, you could pass to the right, and during round 3, you could pass your cards to the left again. The game of Sushi Go ends after players have completed 3 full rounds of the game. After the game ends, the final step of the game is to score pudding cards. Pudding cards will either gain a player 6 points or have the potential to lose a player 6 points. The player holding the most pudding cards at the end of the game will score 6 points. If more than one player ties for the most pudding cards, the players will divide the 6 points by the amount of tied players and round the score down to the nearest whole number. So if these 3 players all had 2 pudding cards at the end of the game, they would divide the 6 points between them, and each player would score 2 points. The player, or players, with the least pudding cards at the end of the game will lose 6 points. This penalty includes all players, even those who did not play any pudding cards during the game. The 6 points lost will be divided between all of the players with the least amount of pudding cards. So if player 1 had the most pudding cards in their player area at the end of the game, they would score 6 points for the most pudding cards. Players 2 and 4 would be tied for the least pudding cards because neither of them had played any pudding cards. These 2 players would split the 6 points lost between them, and each player would lose 3 points from their score. If all players happen to have the same amount of pudding cards in their player area, no points will be given for pudding cards. It should be noted that in a 2-player game, only the player with the most pudding cards will score 6 points. The player with the second most will not lose 6 points in a 2-player game. After scoring their pudding cards, each player will look at their final score for the game. The player with the highest score at the end of the game will be declared the winner.